Pini Hinare, Tanakwe.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for this opportunity. First, Mr. Chair, can I take this opportunity to farewell Mr. Fred Fata, who worked hard to ensure that Māori values were in the justice system, in a rigid justice system based out of Rotorua, who was laid to rest last week, Thursday. Can I farewell him? And in farewelling him, I cast my mind back to other significant contributors to this discussion who, despite not being in the earthly realm with us today, their influence continues, and Judge McBrown is one who comes to mind. When the Minister spoke about the length of time it takes to make such changes, I couldn't help but pull out my copy of Pu Aotearoa Sir some many decades ago and consider some of the recommendations made in there. And I'm reminded of the quote used by the member John O'Naylor, who quoted my grandfather in his maiden speech when he said, "We have come too far not to go further. We have done too much not to do more." And so I'm reminded of that particular saying at this point in time when I consider the proposed changes in this bill, and my colleagues on this side of the House have certainly expressed their view quite clearly on it, and I want to contribute in the same vein with regard to the changing of as detailed in the SOP submitted by Jacinda Ardern around the age of 18 and how important that is in the wider debate around those particular circumstances that those young people find themselves in. So it speaks to the confusion that's offered in this particular instance when so many of our young people, and I mentioned this in a previous debate on this bill, around a sort of a rite of passage. When am I a young person? When am I no longer a young person? What does this mean when I turn 18? I'm still 17. Can I drink? Can I drive? Well, not at the same time, and certainly not drive after drinking, but can I do all these things? So there's a large confusion amongst our young people, and we want to make sure that there's some sort of, I wouldn't say seamless for those who find themselves in these unfortunate circumstances, but that the law is very clear in this particular instance that includes up to 18-year-olds. So, and I also want to talk about Clause 7. Clause 7 is the one around the delegation of powers, and I take the Minister's point around the delegation of powers to potential iwi who look to care for the many Māori, many of their descendants who find themselves in the child, youth and family system. And while I appreciate that there are a lot of Māori operators in the social workspace, I can't help but with a sense of trepidation and concern around, not the intent, but what will this look like? How do these powers of delegation actually play out on the ground if we're giving responsibility to iwi, for example, as the Minister pointed out, giving responsibility to iwi to look after the young people. And I've got a lot of concerns about that because, sir, in Tāmaki Makaurau, where most of the children in state care are, iwi influence, we know that the majority of those tamariki are actually from Ngāpuhi. And Ngāpuhi, in terms of their ability to provide services on the ground in Tāmaki Makaurau, are almost non-existent. And I say that in respect of actually facilitating and executing those responsibilities of care as an entity, as a tribal entity in Tāmaki Makaurau, and that's a bit of a concern to me, while acknowledging that many of the social workers in Tāmaki Makaurau are actually of Ngāpuhi descent. But it gets back to that, the scope of delegation of powers and who that should go to. I commend the stance made by many of the iwi, in particular at the Iwi Leaders Forum, around their commitment to our young people. And in fact, I was there a number of years ago when Nader Glavish and others made that commitment at the Iwi Leaders Forum. Number of years later, not much has changed. Speaking of not much has changed, sir, if you just look in the Pu Aotearoa book here, you will see that the numbers actually aren't too dissimilar to the numbers of children in state care back in the 80s as they are today, sir.
Ai ko Jan